Thinking for yourself has always been a risky act. Throughout history, those who dared to challenge the so-called guardians of truth were silenced, mocked, or even killed. Yet their ideas lived on. Dangerous thoughts that still echo today, powerful enough to shake entire systems. We're surrounded by subtle prisons, social norms that dictate how we behave. Official truths that shape how we see the world, inner illusions that keep us blind, and above all, the fear of creating something truly new. This video presents 24 dangerous philosophical ideas that cross those four boundaries of mind and being. Freedom from society, because control doesn't need chains, just your obedience. Freedom from truth, because whoever controls what's real controls you. Freedom from illusion, because sometimes your biggest prison is yourself. Freedom to create, because creating is standing up to both chaos and the system. These ideas aren't for everyone. They challenge, disrupt, and rewire. But if you've ever felt like something is wrong with the world, or with yourself, maybe you're ready. Have you ever felt like there's something inside you, a creative, bold, free force, that keeps getting trimmed down by what others expect from you? Nietzsche, the philosopher of transgression and the abyss, would call that the repression of the strong individual by the rules of collective morality. In one of his most provocative quotes, he states, "Morality is the herd instinct in the individual." But what does that actually mean? To Nietzsche, morality, as we know it in Western tradition, isn't the result of reason or true kindness. It's born out of a need to control, not to help us evolve. The values of goodness, humility, compassion, and self-sacrifice, what many see as universal virtues, were, according to him, designed to tame the strong, to stop free, powerful, and creative individuals from threatening a world built by the weak. Harsh, maybe, but that's the core of Nietzsche's thinking, putting his finger on the wound of social hypocrisy. What he calls herd morality teaches you to blend in, to conform, to avoid standing out. It tells you, don't go too far, don't think differently, don't be better than others. Because deep down, the herd fears the one who stands apart. It fears the free spirit. And this isn't just about religion or politics, it's about everyday life. When you hold back your real desires just to seem normal. When you choose the safe path just to avoid disappointing others. When you feel guilty for being proud of yourself or for wanting more out of life. You're, without realizing it, living under herd morality. Nietzsche believed that society, rather than empowering the individual, often acts like a golden cage. You might feel comfortable in it, but you're still trapped. Real freedom, for him, isn't about following collective morality. It's about creating your own values. That's the Nietzschean challenge, breaking free from imposed morality and becoming the creator of your own life. And that journey is anything but easy, because the first step is painful, realizing that many of your values aren't really yours. They were inherited, absorbed, imposed by family, school, religion, the government, the media, and we repeat them like they're absolute truths. But are they? Nietzsche doesn't want you to become selfish or a rebel without a cause. What he offers is deeper, to live with authenticity, courage, and strength. He pushes us to ask, who are you when no one's watching? And who could you become if you stopped asking for permission? Of course, society needs rules to function, but Nietzsche warns us, be careful with rules that steal your soul in exchange for acceptance. Be wary of a culture that preaches kindness but punishes excellence. Be skeptical of a world that worships equality while suppressing individuality. To him, the greatest betrayal of yourself is living as a copy, when you were born to create. And this leads to one of his most powerful concepts, the Übermensch, or overman, someone who has transcended inherited values and shaped their life like a work of art. This person is no tyrant. They are someone who knows themselves deeply and lives from their own truth, unafraid to disrupt the norm. But don't get it twisted. This path demands responsibility. Creating your own values isn't an excuse for arrogance or selfishness. It's a call for clarity. It means owning your conscience, being in charge of yourself, not of others. Nietzsche challenges us to stop living by what should be and start living by what could be. He doesn't give you answers. He provokes, disturbs, shakes you so that you can find your own voice. So think about this. How many of your choices were truly yours? How many dreams have you let go of just to fit in? And what if your freedom lies on the other side of your courage to be different? Herd morality wants you to settle. We live surrounded by noise, commitments, and distractions. But have you ever stopped to think about how society teaches us to fill every minute, not with meaning, but with escape? It's common to see people rushing around, not because they know where they're going, but because stopping would mean facing their own emptiness. Arthur Schopenhauer, always sharp and provocative, captured this with a brutally honest line. Ordinary people think merely of spending time. The talented think of using it. What he's pointing out isn't about intelligence, status, or success. It's about self-awareness, about how we choose to live our days inside a system that shapes our deepest habits from an early age. Schopenhauer saw time as the most precious thing we have, and ironically, the thing we waste the most. Modern society is built to avoid inner silence. It distracts us, speeds us up, conditions us to live on autopilot. Routines become mechanical. Leisure becomes numbing. Time turns into something to kill or something to ignore. That's where the problem lies. We live to pass the time, not to inhabit it. But why? Because we've been culturally trained to fear emptiness. Being alone, without stimulation or a packed schedule, feels dangerous. After all, what might surface if we stopped running? What questions would rise if the noise went quiet? Schopenhauer believed people who just try to pass the time do so because they can't stand being alone with themselves. And that's not a personal flaw, it's a social trap. From childhood, we're told to stay constantly occupied. School, activities, work, endless obligations, screen time. The result is a life that moves fast, but doesn't go deep. That's always in motion, but never really awake. On the flip side, Schopenhauer highlights the person who uses time with intention, not because they're talented in the traditional sense, but because they've cultivated depth. This is the person who lives from the inside out, who reads not to kill time, but to expand, who creates, studies, reflects, not out of vanity, but because they understand that time isn't a prison, it's an opportunity. That awareness takes effort, and more than effort, it takes courage. Because the moment you start using your time with depth, you have to give up many of the distractions the world throws at you. You have to face the discomfort of being with yourself. You have to dive into a level of existence that doesn't fit the shallow molds we're sold as success. The freedom Schopenhauer offers isn't the freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want. It's something rarer. The freedom to step out of the current of mediocrity, of autopilot, of repetition. The freedom to be loyal to your own awareness, even when the whole world is rushing the other way. That's why this lesson comes with an honest question. How are you using your time? Are you just waiting for it to pass? Or are you filling it with something that reflects who you really are? That's the real dividing line, because in the end, time is the quiet stage where each of us builds, or wastes, our life. Schopenhauer reminds us that hours don't come back, days don't repeat, and life, no matter how long it seems, is far too short to throw away on meaningless distractions. But most importantly, he reminds us that the ability to use time, isn't something you're just born with. It can be cultivated. It doesn't matter where you are or how you've lived up to now. What matters is realizing that time doesn't have to be just the space between obligations. It can be the space where you finally start living, with purpose, with autonomy, with presence. And when that shift happens, when you begin to see each day as a chance for authentic expression, you're no longer just a product of society. You become what it fears the most, a fully awake human being. Picture a newborn child, free from obligations, rules, or roles. No social expectations, no labels, just pure existence. But as the child grows, something changes. Bit by bit, they start to mold themselves to the world around them, learning what they should do, how they should behave, what they're supposed to feel. And without realizing it, that original freedom is replaced by an invisible web of expectations and rules that silently take control. This is the transformation Rousseau exposes with his famous line, "Man is born free, yet everywhere he is in chains." To Rousseau, these chains aren't physical. They're moral, cultural, and social. They're made of customs, institutions, and norms that shape us from the moment we're born. He believed society, as we know it, doesn't protect our freedom. It corrupts it. In his view, humans are born with a natural tendency toward goodness, cooperation, and the freedom to be who they truly are. But once we step into the structured world of social life, that instinct gets buried. We're taught to compete, to conform, to follow rules we rarely question, mostly out of fear of rejection or punishment. Modern society, Rousseau argues, turns people into roles: parent, employee, citizen, consumer, influencer. But behind those titles, there's often a suffocated, anxious, fragmented self. Have you ever felt that? Like you're playing a part in a script you didn't write? Rousseau shows us how social systems pull us away from our deeper nature. What was once spontaneous becomes calculated. What was once real becomes performance. We're taught to look virtuous instead of actually cultivating virtue, to obey rules without asking whether they're truly just or just tools to preserve power. And this is Rousseau's central tension. Civil society, instead of setting us free, traps us in a maze of false needs. This critique feels even more relevant today. We live in a world where freedom is marketed like a product, as if being free means choosing between brands, trends, or pre-packaged opinions. But Rousseau invites us to look deeper. True freedom doesn't mean choosing within the system. It means questioning the system itself. He believed we could only reclaim our original freedom by rebuilding the social contract around the general will, not the dominance of a few over the many. That would require a radical shift, both political and ethical. A return to what he called the state of nature, not by abandoning civilization, but by reconnecting with what really matters. But Rousseau wasn't idealizing the past. He wasn't saying we should live like cavemen. What he wanted was for us to recover the integrity, autonomy, and authenticity that civilization made us forget. That begins with asking honest questions. What truly belongs to me? What values did I choose? And which ones did I just inherit? When am I actually free? And when am I just reacting to what others expect of me? Rousseau wanted to wake us up to the possibility of rebuilding our freedom, and that's not easy. It means recognizing that many of the systems we trust, school, work, media, politics, might be teaching us how to function, not how to truly live. To be free, in this context, doesn't mean living without rules. It means living by principles you've chosen for yourself, not ones imposed on you. That's what Rousseau called moral freedom. The ability to give yourself your own laws instead of being guided by others' interests dressed up as virtue. And maybe the heaviest chains are the ones we accept by habit. Because for Rousseau, the greatest enemy of freedom isn't outside force. It's internal resignation. So this lesson demands more than reflection. It requires vigilance. It takes courage to notice the chains we no longer even see, the patterns we follow, the truths we never question, the paths we take just because we always have. To break free from society, in Rousseau's sense, is the act of someone willing to relearn how to be human, not just a citizen, worker, or useful piece of the system. It's the radical choice to live with authenticity, even when it means disappointing the world around you. If this idea stirred something in you, just imagine what else we can explore together. Subscribe to the channel and keep walking with us on this path of thought, clarity, and transformation. From an early age, we're taught to become what others expect of us. The way we speak, dress, behave. It's like everything comes pre-scripted, as if life is something to be performed, not created. And for women, this pressure has been even more intense, more subtle, and more deeply rooted. Simone de Beauvoir, one of the most powerful voices in modern thought, exposed this silent form of imprisonment with a single sentence. It is through the eyes of others that a woman sees herself. At first glance, the quote might seem simple, but it carries a heavy existential weight. Beauvoir invites us to recognize something many people live through without ever questioning. That identity, especially female identity, is often shaped by outside expectations. In other words, instead of being, women are taught to appear. According to Beauvoir, from birth, women are shaped by stories and roles that define them before they ever get a chance to define themselves. They're taught to be gentle, pleasing, beautiful, nurturing, emotional. But who decided those are the traits that define a woman? Beauvoir's answer is clear. The other. Society, men, culture, traditions all impose a role, a mold, an image, and the cruelest part. Over time, that image becomes internalized. A woman starts seeing herself through someone else's eyes. She judges herself based on how others see her. She doesn't live her freedom. She lives to fit the role she's been given. She's not affirmed as a subject. She becomes the object of someone else's desire and judgment. But this critique isn't only about gender, it's about freedom. For Beauvoir, the most dangerous kind of oppression isn't the one that comes from the outside. It's the one that settles inside. When a woman believes she has to be what others expect, even unconsciously, she's no longer living as a free person. She starts to repeat. She imitates. She adapts. Breaking free from that takes courage. Real courage. It means going against centuries of conditioning, family expectations, beauty standards, social norms. It often means being misunderstood or even rejected. But true freedom, according to Beauvoir, isn't found in comfortably playing a role. It's found in having the real possibility to choose who you want to be, even if that means disappointing others. This leads to one of the most powerful ideas in existentialist thought. Human beings are not born ready. They become. Beauvoir rejected any essentialist idea of female nature. There's no fixed essence that says what a woman should be. What exists is the freedom to become. And that's a right that must be reclaimed. But Beauvoir also understood the reality that freedom isn't handed over. It has to be earned. And the fight begins on the inside, when a woman starts to question the image that was given to her. When she starts to ask, who am I, without the expectations placed on me? What do I truly want, and what have I just learned to want so I could be accepted? This breaking point is both liberating and lonely. Because when a woman stops playing the role of the other, the one who's meant to please, serve, complete, she steps into the role of a full subject. And that space, while more authentic, can feel unfamiliar at first. After all, it's easier to play a role than to live in your own truth. But that's the beauty of Beauvoir's thought. Being a woman is not a destiny, it's a creation. Freedom, then, is the act of becoming outside the mold. It's claiming yourself as a work in progress, not a reflection of other people's expectations. And this applies to all of us in different ways. We all carry images inside us that were shaped by how others see us, how we should love, work, look, react. Breaking free from that is an ongoing challenge, but a necessary one. Beauvoir invites us not to mistake praise for permission, not to confuse social approval with true freedom, to become who we really are, not who others expect us to be, because in the end, the only gaze that truly frees us is our own, turned inward with honesty and courage. What if what you call yourself is actually the result of an invisible process of control? What if your identity, your choices, even your deepest desires were shaped before you ever had the chance to notice? Michel Foucault, one of the most provocative thinkers of the 20th century, dedicated his work to exposing the hidden machinery behind what we call the self, and he summed it up with a powerful and unsettling idea. Power structures produce the subject. This changes everything. Because unlike the traditional view that sees power only as something that represses, limits, or punishes, Foucault shows us that power also creates. It shapes behavior, defines norms, sets standards for what's normal and what's deviant. Most importantly, it shapes identities. We like to believe we're free, authentic, in control of our lives. But Foucault asks us to look deeper. He shows that we live within systems, schools, governments, hospitals, courts, that don't just regulate life. They produce it. We are shaped. When you go to school, you learn more than math or grammar. You learn to sit in rows, raise your hand, wait for permission, get graded. That's not just education, that's behavioral training. When you go to the doctor, your body is measured, labeled, and compared to a standard. When you grow up, you learn to act appropriately, to function in a way that's acceptable. And often, without realizing it, you drift away from who you truly are. That's power at work, not as brute force, but as subtle discipline. Foucault calls this biopower, a kind of power that manages bodies, regulates lives, and defines identities. It's not the power of kings holding swords. It's the power of norms, convincing you to follow rules as if they were just how things are. And here's the most unsettling part. There's no villain behind the curtain. There's no mastermind pulling the strings. Power is everywhere, in language, media, science, family, religion. It's embedded, reproduced, normalized. The result? You start behaving the way you're expected to. You start thinking within the limits of what's acceptable. You start desiring what you were taught to desire, and you believe that's freedom, but it's not. For Foucault, true freedom doesn't come from escaping power. That's impossible. It comes from becoming aware of how power operates. It comes from seeing the invisible machinery that shapes us so we can begin to resist, reinvent, reimagine. And that resistance doesn't happen with protests or riots. It happens through critique, through awareness, through refusing to accept as natural what is actually constructed. Foucault studied prisons, hospitals, schools, asylums, all institutions designed to shape people. He showed that power has shifted over time. It's no longer just about punishment. Now it's about producing subjectivity. You're not just controlled, you're manufactured. That means your identity, your sense of who you are, might be more conditioned than you think. Gender, sexuality, nationality, profession, even your idea of success. All of it could be the product of systems, of power working through social norms and cultural narratives. So here comes the uncomfortable question. Who would you be if you hadn't been taught who to be? Foucault doesn't give easy answers. He doesn't believe in some hidden, true self waiting to be freed. For him, there's no essence beneath the surface. What exists is a field of possibilities. And the more aware you are of the forces that shape you, the more freedom you have to reshape yourself. Freedom, then, isn't about escaping power. It's about playing with it, pushing against it, giving it new meaning. It's being able to say, I know what's expected of me, but I choose differently. It's becoming, little by little, the author of your own identity. Foucault invites us to let go of comforting certainties, to look inward with courage and outward with awareness. Because maybe the most dangerous chains aren't the ones that hold us back against our will, but the ones that teach us to enjoy the cage. Foucault reminds us, identity isn't a destination, it's a battlefield. And to live freely is to step into that fight with awareness, boldness, and imagination. We live in a world that constantly pushes us away from ourselves. We're taught to seek validation through social media, appearances, titles, and achievements. Everything revolves around external performance, as if life only has value when it's seen, measured, liked. Carl Jung, a deep thinker of the human soul, invites us in the opposite and more difficult direction. He who looks outside dreams, he who looks inside awakens. At first glance, this might sound poetic, but it holds a powerful truth. As long as we search for meaning outside of ourselves, we'll live in a kind of illusion. We'll dream of success, recognition, perfect love, universal acceptance. But all of that will feel like fog, temporary, fragile, never enough. For Jung, true freedom isn't about fitting into the world. It's about waking up to who we really are. And that awakening requires a deep, courageous, and transformative journey, the process of individuation. Individuation is how a person becomes whole, not by standing out in front of others, but by making peace with their inner self. It means integrating all parts of who we are, light and shadow, logic and instinct, our social mask and our true essence. From an early age, we learn to wear masks, what Jung called the persona. This social mask helps us get by, protect ourselves, and function in society. The problem is when we mistake the mask for who we actually are. We end up playing the role of a well-behaved character in a story we forgot we were performing. So what gets left out of that character? Our fears, our unacceptable desires, our repressed anger, our vulnerabilities, our buried creativity. Everything we learn to hide just to be acceptable. Jung called this our shadow and warned, what we don't face in ourselves, we eventually meet as fate. That's why looking inward is so important. It's through that inner dive that we begin to discover who we really are. Not what the world expects, but what our unconscious whispers when we finally silence the noise around us. But be warned, this journey isn't comfortable. Looking inward means facing what we avoid. It means walking through our pain, contradictions, and masks. Above all, it means stopping the habit of living to please others. Because society, with its expectations, wants to shape you. It wants you to follow the crowd, chase trends, repeat behavior. It wants you to be predictable. But the human soul wasn't born to repeat. It was born to meet itself. Jung reminds us, only those who truly know themselves can act with real freedom. Otherwise, we're always reacting, trying to prove our worth, chasing love in the wrong places, repeating patterns we inherited, living like sleepwalkers, awake on the outside, but asleep inside. Individuation isn't some spiritual luxury. It's an existential need. It's the difference between living on autopilot and living with presence, between existing for others and living from your own truth. So how do we begin this process? With honesty, with listening inward, with letting go of the rush and the comparisons. It's a path that might include art, therapy, writing, meditation, anything that creates space for you to truly hear yourself. And yes, it's a solitary journey, not because you'll be alone, but because no one else can do it for you. Jung knew the human being is a mystery in motion, and freedom isn't about reaching some perfect version of yourself. It's about becoming more whole, not more flawless, but more real. That's why the biggest prison may not be out there in society's rules or external systems. The biggest prison is being disconnected from yourself, and the greatest freedom is coming back home. So the question Jung leaves us with is simple and powerful. Are you living like someone who's dreaming or someone who's awakening? The answer lies in where you're looking. because the outer world distracts you, but the inner world can set you free. Every culture is built on truths. But who said those truths are eternal? Friedrich Nietzsche challenged one of the most deeply rooted beliefs in Western thought, the idea that there are pure, objective, unquestionable facts. For him, this so-called objectivity is just a well-crafted illusion. That's why he wrote with unsettling clarity, "There are no facts, only interpretations." This doesn't mean reality doesn't exist. It means we should question how we see it. It challenges the way we shape the world into truths that comfort us, while hiding their human, historical, and cultural origins. Nietzsche shows us that what we call truth is often just a collective agreement, a dominant narrative, not because it's more true, but because it's more powerful, more useful, or more convenient. Behind every so-called absolute truth, he says, is a will to power. That means truths aren't neutral. They come with intentions. They shape behavior. They define who gets heard and who gets silenced. They decide what can be said and what must be shut down. Think about how religions, governments, schools, companies, and even families create truths about right and wrong, about what's normal, desirable, or acceptable. But what if those truths are just accepted interpretations turned into dogma? Breaking free from those imposed beliefs is the heart of what Nietzsche calls tragic philosophy. He's not searching for comfort. He's after clarity. And that clarity means understanding that behind every certainty is a human-made construction, not a divine revelation. What we call natural or obvious might just be a story repeated so many times that we forgot it was a story. This awareness takes courage, because living without absolute truths means letting go of solid ground. It means facing the fact that life might not come with built-in meaning, and maybe, just maybe, it's up to us to create it. Nietzsche wasn't tearing down truth just to destroy. He was making space to build something new. He was opening the door to a different kind of freedom, the freedom to think for yourself, to interpret the world on your own terms, to create meaning from within. But let's be clear, this doesn't mean anything goes or that every opinion is equally valid. Nietzsche wasn't endorsing ignorance. What he was fighting against was intellectual laziness, the habit of accepting whatever explanation comes easiest. To him, a true philosopher is someone who dares to question even what seems unquestionable. There are no facts, only interpretations, is a call to creative responsibility. Once we realize there's no universal manual, we're challenged to write our own, not to please others, not to follow the crowd, but to live with depth and integrity. And this leads to a powerful shift. Freeing yourself from truth doesn't mean falling into the void. It means gaining the power to create meaning. It's realizing that life doesn't come with a ready-made purpose, and that's exactly what makes it so valuable. Nietzsche believed human beings should become artists of their own lives. If there are no fixed truths, then existence becomes a blank canvas, a space to live with style, to say yes to life, even in the face of chaos or absurdity. In this view, the search for truth is no longer about finding some permanent point in the universe. It's about discovering which interpretations make us more alive, more aware, more free. So maybe the real question isn't what's the truth, but does this interpretation make me more free, more honest, more fully alive? Nietzsche invites us to let go of comforting illusions, to break from dogmas, to even doubt the things we're told never to question. Not out of disrespect for reason, but out of love for freedom. And maybe, through that process, we'll discover this. The deepest truth isn't something you own, it's something you live. Some truths don't arrive to applause. They show up to silence, mockery, and resistance. First, they're laughed at. Then, they're fiercely attacked. And only much later, once they no longer pose a threat, are they accepted as if they'd been obvious all along. Arthur Schopenhauer, philosopher of discomfort and deep clarity, captured this process in a sentence that still hits hard today. All truth passes through three stages. First, it is ridiculed. Then, it is violently opposed. And finally, it is accepted as self-evident. This isn't just a historical observation. It's a warning about how we, both as individuals and as a society, react when our beliefs are challenged. The most powerful truths, the ones that reshape how we see the world, are rarely welcomed with open arms. They unsettle us. They shake up the status quo. They force us to think, and that's often more painful than we want to admit. Schopenhauer understood that most people aren't really searching for truth. They're searching for comfort. We prefer what's familiar over what's true. We cling to the known. That's why, when someone presents an idea that breaks away from the norm, the first reaction is often to mock it. Laughing it off is easier than seriously considering it. Think about how many people were treated in their time. Galileo was mocked for saying the Earth wasn't the center of the universe. Darwin was attacked for claiming we evolved through natural processes. Nietzsche was called crazy for questioning traditional morality. Simone de Beauvoir was dismissed for saying, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman." Today, these ideas are widely quoted, taught in schools, shared online, but at first, they were seen as threats, rejected because they said what no one wanted to hear. That's the cycle Schopenhauer exposed. Truth that transforms will first make people uncomfortable, because it doesn't just change opinions, it shakes up identities. It forces us to leave our comfort zones and look at the world with new eyes, and not everyone is ready for that. Here's the deeper point. It's not just society that pushes away uncomfortable truths, it's each of us. How many times have you rejected a new idea simply because it would force you to change? How often have you chosen to doubt the truth instead of admitting you were wrong? How many times have you clung to what's familiar, even when something more honest was calling you forward? The path to truth takes humility. It takes courage. It takes the strength to be mocked and pushed away, even by people you love. Schopenhauer urges us to look beyond the surface of popular opinion. He reminds us that just because an idea is widely accepted doesn't make it true. And just because an idea is unpopular doesn't make it false. Truth often walks alone before it is embraced. But there's also a hidden risk. Once a truth is accepted, it stops being questioned. It becomes the new tradition, the new dogma, the new obvious. And the cycle begins again. Comfort replaces thought, vision fades, and new truths must be born, again mocked, again fought, until they too become self-evident. That's why Schopenhauer teaches that seeking truth is not a final destination. It's a lifelong process. It's an act of attention, of breaking things down, of listening deeply. And above all, it's the willingness to hold on to uncomfortable truths, even when the world isn't ready. Breaking from the crowd doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you honest. Truth isn't measured by how many people repeat it, but by how deeply it resonates with an awake and honest mind. So here's the question. Are you ready to stand by a truth no one else sees yet? Are you willing to be the outcast, the heretic, the one who won't settle for shallow answers? Because maybe the deepest kind of freedom isn't just in speaking the truth. It's in staying true to it, even when everyone else is still laughing. If this message sparked something in you, just imagine what else we can explore together. Subscribe to the channel and keep walking this path of thought, clarity, and transformation. Most of us think of truth as something that's just out there, like a fact waiting to be uncovered, measured, confirmed. But what if truth isn't just something we find? What if it only appears when something inside us opens up first? That's what Martin Heidegger, one of the 20th century's deepest thinkers, suggests with a phrase that might sound strange at first, but holds a profound meaning. Freedom is the essence of truth. It flips everything we usually think. because he's saying that truth doesn't force itself on us. It reveals itself. And for that to happen, we need to be free. But Heidegger's not talking about surface-level freedom, like doing whatever you want. He means something deeper and quieter. The freedom to let things show up as they really are. To Heidegger, humans aren't just creatures who know stuff. We're beings who are open. We live in the world with context, language, history, and limitations. And it's in that messy, real existence that truth can appear. But truth, he says, isn't just a fact to grab and own. He borrows the ancient Greek word aletheia, which means uncovering or revealing. Truth is what shows up, if we're willing to see it. And for something to reveal itself truthfully, it needs space. It needs freedom. Freedom from hurry, from dogma, from prejudgment. It needs presence more than opinion. It needs us to let things be. Heidegger is telling us, you can't force truth with control or arrogance, because every time we try to grab truth, it hides. It's like trying to take in a beautiful landscape while speeding past it in a train. The rush to get it keeps us from really seeing it. This applies to everything. Understanding a person. You can only truly know someone when you let them be themselves, without judgment. Understanding yourself? That comes in silence, in listening inward, when you stop trying to be who people expect. Seeing the world clearly? Only happens when you stop projecting your own ideas onto everything. So, freedom becomes the ground where truth can grow. And that has powerful meaning. Because humans aren't just seekers of truth, we have to be open enough to receive it. Heidegger warns us, it's often us who block truth. When we chase fast answers, when we cling to rigid beliefs, when we label everything too quickly, we shrink our ability to really see. That's why he criticizes modern obsession with technology and efficiency. We've made everything about usefulness and control, but that leaves no room for mystery, for silence, for presence. And without those, truth becomes a formula, dead, not alive. So real freedom in this sense is the openness to being. It's choosing to listen, not dominate, to welcome, not possess. It's also how we find meaning in life. There's no one-size-fits-all truth waiting at the finish line. There's a world that reveals itself slowly if we approach it with honesty. And here's one of Heidegger's most beautiful insights. Truth is not a conclusion, it's an event. It's not found in a book or a theory. It's in the way we relate to existence. That's why truth can't be handed down like a lecture. It has to be lived. It has to be welcomed. It has to be cultivated. In the quiet, open space of an awake mind. In this light, freedom isn't the absence of rules, it's the presence of attention. The ability to hold back judgment, the trust in mystery. So instead of asking, what's the truth? Maybe the real question is, am I truly open for the truth to reveal itself? Because as long as we try to force it, truth will stay hidden. But if we open up without rush or arrogance, it just might appear like a soft, quiet, liberating light. Not every decision is born from logic. You might think you're choosing based on reason, but if you look deeper, you'll often find a desire, a fear, or a hope behind the choice. Something emotional guiding you, with reason just stepping in afterward to justify it. This is one of the more uncomfortable truths David Hume brings to light, when he says, reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. He's not insulting intelligence or celebrating emotional chaos. He's challenging the illusion that we think in a vacuum. We think the way we feel. And more, often than not, we think to justify what we already feel. Hume's statement is a direct blow to the rationalist pride of his time. The idea that universal truths could be built from pure logic and absolute principles. To Hume, that's just not how human beings work. Because reason on its own doesn't move us. It can calculate, analyze, and plan. But it doesn't decide what we care about. It doesn't tell us what truly matters. When we act, It's not because a formula told us to. It's because something inside us wants to. That something is always emotional. For Hume, passion is the engine of human life. It's what gives meaning to the world, tells us what matters and what doesn't. Without it, reason is just an empty tool, cold, lifeless, and disconnected. He saw the human mind as more of a stage of emotions than a machine of logic. Beliefs, impressions, desires, and habits come together not through strict logic, but through repetition, emotional impact, and association. And in this play, reason plays a role, but it's not the lead. This idea forces us to accept something uncomfortable. We're not rational beings who feel. We're feeling beings who rationalize, and that changes everything, because it means we can't pretend our truths are pure, neutral, or universal. Every truth we cling to is soaked in emotion. Every theory we believe in carries a personal feeling, even if we don't realize it. Hume also challenged the idea that morality comes from reason. For him, good and evil aren't logical truths, they're emotional responses. When we condemn injustice, we don't do it because of some mathematical formula. We do it because we feel it: anger, compassion, disgust. Reason can help us sort those feelings out, but it doesn't create them. This puts emotion at the center of ethics and knowledge, far from both cold rationalism and strict religious morality. It reminds us, we don't change people's minds with arguments alone. We change them through the emotional impact of those arguments. From this perspective, real freedom isn't found in pure logic. It's found in knowing our passions clearly, because when we don't know what's really driving us, we're controlled by unconscious impulses, unexamined desires, and inherited emotional patterns. But once we do become aware of our passions, we can begin to guide them. We can nurture the ones that lift us up, that lead to compassion, courage, creativity. This is a more honest and more human version of freedom. Not the rejection of emotion, but the conscious integration of reason and emotion. Hume's not saying we should abandon reason. He's saying, don't fool yourself into thinking reason comes first. Reason comes after, to reflect, to justify, to make sense. But emotion is what starts the whole thing. And that helps explain why people can believe in totally irrational things with absolute certainty, not because they're dumb, but because there's a powerful feeling behind that belief, an identity, a wound, a fear. Reason shows up afterward, to defend that feeling, not to question it. That's why, if we ever want to really free someone's mind, we can't just hit them with facts. We have to understand what's at stake, emotionally, because as Hume taught us, it's not reason that chooses what to protect, it's passion. Not everything we feel can be put into words. Not everything that exists can be explained. But we live in a world that seems to believe the opposite, that everything can be named, described, categorized, as if language were a perfect mirror of reality, able to capture every nuance of existence. Ludwig Wittgenstein challenges this arrogance. In his book Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, he wrote one of the most powerful and mysterious phrases in modern philosophy. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. But this isn't about staying silent out of ignorance or fear. It's an act of respect, respect for the limits of language, respect for the mystery of existence, respect for everything that goes beyond the grasp of rational speech. Wittgenstein spent part of his philosophical work examining what can be said clearly and what cannot. He understood that language is a powerful tool, but a limited one. It works well when we're talking about things, logic, and concrete facts. But when we try to use it to talk about the absolute, the divine, morality, or the ultimate meaning of life, it fails. Not because those things aren't real, but because they belong to a realm that doesn't submit to logical structure. And here's the freedom this lesson offers us. The freedom not to force the unspeakable into words, The freedom to recognize that silence can sometimes speak louder than 1,000 explanations. The freedom to accept that some things are meant to be lived, not defined. We live in a society that's afraid of silence. We have opinions on everything, even when we don't really understand anything. Social media amplifies this noise, a flood of words, often driven not by thought, but by anxiety to be seen, heard, and right. Wittgenstein offers us the opposite, the humility to say, I don't know how to put this into words, to accept that not all truth fits inside a sentence. This isn't stepping back from reason, it's a step forward in philosophical maturity. Because when we force language to say what it can't, we create illusions. And the real danger of language isn't what it can't say, it's what it claims to say with false certainty. How often do we throw around big words? God, justice, soul, infinity, without really knowing what we're talking about? How often do we cover up our ignorance with confident-sounding theology or science, as if we could control what transcends us? Wittgenstein doesn't deny the existence of mystery. He simply says, the mystery begins where language ends, and that's where real listening, real contemplation, real inner silence begins. To be silent, in this sense, isn't to withdraw. It's a deeper kind of presence. It's realizing that some of life's most essential experiences, love, pain, the sacred, emptiness, can only be understood by living them. Trying to reduce them to definitions only betrays their depth. This also teaches us about limits, not as barriers, but as invitations. When we accept that some things can't be said, we make space for other dimensions of experience: the symbolic, the intuitive, the artistic, the spiritual. Freedom, then, isn't about talking about everything. It's about knowing when silence is more honest than speech. Wittgenstein knew that language is a map, but the map is not the territory. Confusing the two makes us believe that understanding something logically is the same as experiencing it directly, but some truths only reveal themselves when we stop trying to explain them. So he invites us to a kind of ethical thinking, to speak only when there is clarity, and to be silent when there is depth, not as censorship, but as reverence. Because silence communicates too, and sometimes it says even more. So maybe the most honest question in the face of life's mystery isn't, what is this? But rather, am I willing to listen to what can't be said? Wittgenstein doesn't hand us final answers. He gives us boundaries and reminds us that true freedom of thought begins when we know how far we can go and stop pretending we've arrived where we've barely begun. We run from many things in life: pain, failure, rejection. But according to Carl Jung, there's one kind of escape that's more common, more silent, and far more dangerous: the escape from ourselves. In one of his boldest insights, Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." This quote is like a mirror. It shows us that even though we talk a lot about freedom, self-awareness, and authenticity, many of us live trapped in an inner maze, not because we don't know the way out, but because we're afraid to look within. Jung believed the human soul is vast, deep, full of riches, but also full of shadows. And that's exactly why we avoid going inward. Because down there, in the unconscious, live the parts of ourselves we've rejected, repressed, or tried to forget. In Jung's view, the shadow is everything we don't want to accept about ourselves. Anger, envy, desire, fear, weakness, all the things our persona, the social mask we wear to be accepted, has to hide just to keep functioning. But those parts don't go away. They just sink beneath the surface. They keep acting out, sabotaging us, projecting onto others. And this is where Jung's warning hits hard. We'll do almost anything not to face our soul. Even get sick, repeat destructive patterns, or keep ourselves endlessly distracted. How many times have we stayed in toxic relationships, unhealthy habits, or constant busyness, not for joy, but to avoid the silence where truth might show up? How often do we build a successful image just to cover up a deep sense of not being enough, of feeling lost, unloved, or afraid? For Jung, freedom isn't about escaping those parts. It's about confronting them. Freedom is making conscious what was unconscious. It's the willingness to look inside and honestly, without judgment, see who we really are, with our light and our darkness. This journey isn't easy. It means facing pain, illusions, pride. It's the opposite of the shallow life our culture often rewards. A life obsessed with performance, appearances, productivity, and toxic positivity. But it's also the only path to individuation, the process of becoming whole. Not perfect, but real. Not idealized, but authentic. Facing your soul means stepping off the script others wrote for you. It means no longer repeating old patterns passed down by family, culture, or trauma. It means starting to make choices from awareness, not from habit or emotional hunger. And here's the most liberating truth. When we face ourselves, we stop being victims. Victims of our past, of other people, of randomness. We become the authors of our own transformation. Of course, this takes time. It takes silence. It takes being willing to sit with pain without numbing or running. But it also opens a door that changes everything. The door to reconnection with your true self. Jung said, "What you avoid in yourself is often the key to your growth. Your anger might be a sign you need to set boundaries. Your sadness might show you where you've abandoned yourself. Your fear might be pointing to something that needs protection, or something it's time to face. The soul, when faced, doesn't destroy us. It gives us back to ourselves. It shows us that freedom isn't about living without conflict, but living with awareness of those inner battles. That true strength isn't about denying pain. It's about integrating it as part of your journey. Maybe that's why so many people avoid this path, because it demands responsibility. You can't blame the world anymore. You can't stay on autopilot. You have to take full ownership of who you are. But for those who choose to take that path, there's something no outer success can give. The peace of becoming whole. So Jung leaves us with an essential choice. Keep running from yourself for the comfort of illusion, or face your soul and claim the freedom of being fully, honestly you, with truth, depth, and presence. Because in the end, the greatest prison is self-deception, and the most real freedom begins the moment you dare to look yourself in the eye and not look away. Much of what we call truth is just a well-polished habit. Ideas repeated so many times that they feel solid, not because they're unquestionable, but because we've simply stopped questioning them. Friedrich Nietzsche, one of the most unsettling philosophers in history, shakes us awake with a phrase that challenges the entire structure of what we think is real. Truth is an illusion we have forgotten is an illusion. This isn't wordplay. It's a deep warning about the most dangerous illusion of all. The idea that there's a single, absolute, eternal truth just waiting to be discovered. Nietzsche urges us to look at truth with suspicion. For him, truth isn't a perfect reflection of the world. It's a human construction, a product of interpretation, shaped by culture, history, and power. And the problem isn't that we interpret. The problem is that we forget we're doing it. We forget that words are just metaphors, that ideas are born in context, that knowledge carries the fingerprints, the desires, and the agendas of those who created it. Then we start mistaking the map for the territory. Belief becomes fact. Interpretation becomes absolute. Nietzsche saw this illusion as a kind of mental anesthesia. Instead of facing the chaos and uncertainty of life, we cling to made-up certainties. Fixed truths comfort us, give us structure, offer meaning, but they also trap us. They stop us from seeing that the world isn't stable, final, or simple. It's fluid, messy, full of contradictions. The human mind, Nietzsche said, doesn't crave truth because it's rational. It craves stability because it fears the unknown. And to avoid the abyss, we invent meaning. We build systems. We organize reality with language, concepts, and categories. And then we forget we were the ones who made them up. That's the trap. The illusion of solidity, so well constructed that we start calling it truth. But in reality, we are surrounded by interpretations, useful, powerful, beautiful, yes, but never final. Freeing ourselves from this illusion is one of the boldest acts of maturity. It means recognizing that nothing we know is fully pure or eternal. It means letting go of the need to always be right. It means trading comfort for responsibility, and that takes courage, because without a fixed truth to lean on, we're left with the hardest task of all, becoming the authors of our own meaning. Nietzsche isn't pushing some lazy kind of relativism where everything is whatever, far from it. He's proposing a tougher standard. Truth should be judged by what it does to life. Does it expand or shrink you? Does it free you or control you? Does it spark creativity or force obedience? Truths that kill curiosity, suppress doubt, and block new thought don't deserve the name, no matter how long they've been repeated. For Nietzsche, truth isn't what stays still, it's what stays alive. That's why he said future philosophers would need to be artists. Because truth isn't just about describing the world, it's about reimagining it. This perspective frees us from one of the mind's sneakiest addictions, unquestioning loyalty to how things have always been. It opens us to a different kind of truth, one that's alive, evolving, and constantly being shaped. So Nietzsche's challenge isn't to abandon truth, it's to own its creative nature, to realize that every truth is a choice. And because it's a choice, we carry a deep responsibility to choose wisely. Because if everything is interpretation, that doesn't let us off the hook, it holds us accountable. Freedom here doesn't mean nothing matters. It means we have the power and the duty to create meaning that honors the complexity of life. Maybe the real danger of truth isn't that it's a lie, but that it becomes so accepted, we stop thinking about it. Nietzsche wants to shake us out of that trance, to remind us, behind every certainty, there's a construction. And if you want to live free, the first step is realizing you're dreaming, so you can finally begin to wake up. We like to believe we're free, that our choices come from conscious will, that we shape our lives through logic, planning, and personal agency. But what if that's just a well-crafted illusion? Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brutally honest philosophers of modern times, throws a wrench into something we hold dear, our sense of freedom. He says, "A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants." With just one sentence, he challenges the entire idea of free will. Because for Schopenhauer, the issue isn't what we do, it's where our desire to do something comes from. Yes, we can act according to our will, but his deeper question is, where does that will come from? Why do we want what we want? And that's where everything changes. According to his philosophy, we don't choose our desires. They rise from deeper layers of our being, often unconscious ones. Sure, you can choose coffee over tea. You can pick one job over another. You can even decide whether to follow a spiritual path, but you didn't choose the craving for control, peace, or recognition that drove that decision. That desire just showed up. It came from a place your conscious mind can't reach directly. Schopenhauer was one of the first Western thinkers to seriously explore the unconscious, even before Freud. He believed that our will is a blind, irrational force that lives inside us, pushing us to act, often without our full awareness or consent. And this will isn't personal or logical. It's a raw, life force kind of thing, similar to instinct. We don't control it. We're expressions of it. So what does that mean in everyday life? It means that even our most rational decisions are influenced by impulses, desires, trauma, emotional patterns, and biological instincts that we don't consciously control. You might come up with logical reasons for your choices, but most of the time, You're just explaining something your body and emotions already decided for you. That doesn't mean we're powerless, but it does call for clarity, for honesty. Believing we're completely free might feel comforting, but it often leads to guilt, pressure, and unrealistic expectations. Why can't I change? Why do I keep wanting what's bad for me? Why do I repeat the same mistakes? Schopenhauer gives us a tough but freeing answer, because you don't choose what you want. This shifts how we think about freedom. Real freedom isn't about doing whatever you want, whenever you all want. It's about becoming aware of the hidden forces driving you, and maybe, just maybe, learning how to work with them. And here's the deepest part of this lesson. Real freedom begins where the illusion of control ends. It begins when you stop fighting your will like it's a flaw and start learning from it. It's a quieter, more grounded kind of freedom. The freedom to observe instead of reacting on autopilot. The freedom to face your inner life with clarity instead of being dragged around by it. The freedom to understand yourself so well that unconscious patterns stop running the show. This also makes us more compassionate toward others. When we realize no one chooses their desires, that everyone's being pulled by deep psychological and existential forces, we judge less. We begin to see that so-called bad decisions are often just signs of an inner struggle. Schopenhauer isn't saying we're doomed. He's showing us that the first kind of freedom is psychological, knowing what's driving us. And that kind of freedom doesn't come from willpower alone. It comes from awareness, self-reflection, and courage. His phrase, "A man can do what he wants, but not want what he wants," isn't a prison sentence. It's a key that unlocks the deeper mechanics of how we function, so we can begin the slow, honest work of waking up. Because maybe freedom isn't about choosing anything we want. Maybe it's about understanding why we want what we do, and finally breaking free from what we never chose to carry in the first place. What is beautiful? What is right? What is possible? These things are taught to us as if they were absolute truths. But what if we're only seeing shadows? Plato, the ancient Greek philosopher, gave us one of the most powerful metaphors in all of philosophy to talk about human ignorance, the allegory of the cave. And his warning still echoes today, urging us to wake up. Until they rise from the cave into the light, they will live in error. In this metaphor, Plato describes prisoners who've been chained inside a dark cave since birth. They can't turn their heads. All they see is a wall in front of them. Behind them is a fire. And between the fire and the prisoners, objects pass by, casting shadows on the wall. To the prisoners, those shadows are reality. That's all they've ever known. What Plato shows us is that ignorance isn't just a lack of information. It's living inside an illusion without even realizing you're in one. It's confusing appearance with truth, reflection with reality. It's believing the cave is the entire world. And today, that cave can take many forms. Social media filters, cultural narratives we inherit without question, success formulas we follow without thinking, even our own automatic thoughts, running our lives like they're the only way to see the world. We're surrounded by shadows, and we call it reality. Plato says we only escape this mistake when we're brave enough to turn our heads, break the chains, and climb out of the cave. But that journey is hard. At first, the light blinds you, because unlike illusion, truth is uncomfortable. It challenges you. It shakes everything you thought you knew. That's why many people choose to stay in the cave. Even when the chains are gone, they remain seated. Because outside the cave is uncertainty. Inside, at least, there's comfort, even if it's false. Plato is saying that ignorance is our default state, not because we're incapable, but because it's easier to stay in error than to face it. It's easier to repeat than to reflect, easier to obey than to seek. But living in the cave comes at a price. You're not really you. You're a copy, a shadow, a repetition. Real freedom begins when you choose to rise, even if it means unlearning everything you once believed was true. That climb is what Plato calls philosophy, not philosophy as abstract theory, but philosophy as a process of waking up. For him, philosophy is the soul's journey toward truth. It's the inner drive of someone who just can't bear to live in falsehood any longer, no matter how comfortable the lie may be. And that path requires two things: courage to question easy certainties, and patience to build, slowly and painfully, a deeper, truer way of seeing. But here's the twist. When someone escapes and returns to the cave to tell the others, they're mocked. Because people who still live among shadows don't want to hear about the light. It threatens the order. It makes them uncomfortable. It asks them to change. That's why Plato knew. Freeing yourself from illusion isn't just intellectual. It's rebellious. It's lonely. It's a personal revolution. The cave may be dark, but it's familiar. The light may set you free, but it also exposes you. And often, people prefer the comfort of lies to the discomfort of truth. But Plato insists, if we truly want to live freely, we have to rise. We have to leave the theatre of appearances behind and seek what's real, even if that means facing our own chains, our own ignorance. Because until we rise, we live in error. A comfortable error, maybe, but still a prison. And only those who choose to leave the cave will discover something others can't even imagine. Truth isn't just light, it's life. Do you really know what you're seeing? Or are you just seeing what someone wants you to see? In today's world, where information moves at lightning speed and everything is a filter, a highlight, or a performance, Jean Baudrillard hits us with a deeply unsettling idea. Simulation is more real than the real. At first, it might sound absurd, until you realize how much of what we call reality has already been hijacked by media, social platforms, and the culture of appearances. Baudrillard isn't saying reality no longer exists. What he's saying is even more disturbing. Reality has been replaced by a copy, and no one even noticed. According to him, we live in an age of simulacra, hyper-real versions of the world that have taken the place of the actual world. We don't see things as they are. We see curated representations, polished, edited, branded, and sold as truth. And even worse, we believe in them more than we believe in the raw, messy, imperfect reality they replaced. Think about how we consume information. We don't experience war, disaster, tragedy, or triumph directly. We see them filtered through screens, through carefully chosen camera angles, through pre-scripted narratives. We're not impacted by the event itself. We're impacted by the spectacle of the event. And this isn't just about the media. It's in our everyday lives. What do we post on social media? Curated images of happiness, productivity, success, carefully built profiles, digital versions of ourselves that often don't match how we actually feel, but somehow matter more than our real experience. Baudrillard warns us, the simulation has become the new real. It's like we're all inside a game where signs, icons, and images no longer point to anything outside. They just refer to each other in an endless loop of mirrors. We live in a world where a product can be more famous than it is useful, where a place gets visited not for its meaning, but for its Instagrammability, where a person is valued more for their follower count than for the depth of their thoughts. It's the rise of appearance over authenticity. And the cost? We lose touch with real experience. Life becomes a performance. Reality becomes a set. We're afraid of seeming irrelevant, invisible, outdated, because today, it's not enough to live well. You have to look like you're living well. This shift, where the imitation becomes more valuable than the original, builds a subtle but powerful prison. One where the fake is no longer seen as fake, because everyone's playing the same game. And in this game, questioning the illusion makes you look naive, awkward, or out of touch. In this context, freedom isn't about consuming more reality. It's about breaking the system of simulations that hides it. It's about reclaiming your vision, reclaiming your body, stepping out of the hypnotic flow of constant stimulation and learning how to truly experience again. without filters, without edits, without performance. Baudrillard isn't pushing pure pessimism. He's calling for critical awareness. He's showing us that the real danger isn't being deceived. It's not realizing we're being deceived. It's believing the simulation is all there is. His phrase, "simulation is more real than the real," isn't a conclusion. It's a warning, a wake-up call. Life doesn't happen on screens. It doesn't happen in filters or captions or hashtags. Life happens in the unedited moments, in honest conversations, in shared silences, in real imperfect gestures, in the things that leave a mark on your soul, not on your feed. Reclaiming reality is an act of resistance. It's saying no to the anesthesia of image. It's daring to break the script. It's choosing not to be a spectator of your own life, but the main character in a life truly lived. Because in the end, the biggest illusion isn't believing what's fake. It's forgetting what's real. Freedom is one of the most celebrated ideas of the modern world. We're told that being free means doing whatever we want, whenever we want. But is that really true? Or is it just a comforting idea we repeat to avoid facing a more uncomfortable truth? For Baruch Spinoza, the way we usually think about freedom is an illusion, and he puts it bluntly: human freedom is nothing more than ignorance of the causes. So what does that mean? Spinoza saw the universe as a system where everything, absolutely everything, happens because of cause and effect. Stars follow laws, our bodies follow laws, and so do our minds. Nothing just happens, not even our thoughts, emotions, or decisions. So when we say, "I did that because I wanted to," Spinoza would ask, "And why did you want to?" That desire didn't come out of nowhere. It was shaped by a chain of causes, experiences, influences, instincts, emotions, environments. But because we don't see those causes, we assume we're choosing freely. That's the illusion. We mistake our lack of awareness for independence. Imagine a child who's lived her whole life in one room. Everything she knows is inside that space. She moves around and believes she's choosing freely, but she has no idea that the walls around her are limiting her every step. Spinoza believed most of us live just like that, unaware of the inner and outer forces shaping what we want, how we act, and who we become. And that's why, even though we feel free, we're mostly operating inside invisible systems: social, emotional, biological, and historical. But does that mean we're stuck in a prison of destiny? No. And this is where Spinoza's philosophy really becomes powerful. He offers a new way to think about freedom, not as the absence of causes, but as understanding them. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. Freedom is knowing why you want it. It's when you start to become aware of what's driving you, what triggers you, what influences you, that you begin to act with clarity instead of illusion. It's like turning the lights on in the room. The child still lives in the same space, but now she can see the walls. And that awareness changes everything. Spinoza's idea of freedom isn't idealistic. It's honest. It takes real self-knowledge. It takes emotional discipline. It means being willing to question the things you've always assumed were just how you are, when in fact, they might be automatic responses shaped by your past. And the best part, it puts you back in charge. Because once you understand the patterns that control you, you're no longer controlled by them. You don't have to repeat the same mistakes. You don't have to chase the same things that keep hurting you. You can choose differently, not out of impulse, but out of insight. That's real freedom. Freedom is knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's realizing that "this is just who I am" might be a story built on causes you've never even explored. Spinoza isn't saying you can't change. He's saying the only way to really change is to really know yourself. And you can only do that when you let go of the comforting illusion that you're already in total control. Because there's no freedom without awareness. And there's no awareness without slowing down and taking a hard look inward. In the end, Spinoza's quote isn't an attack on free will. It's an invitation to grow up, to swap "I do what I want" for something much deeper. I understand what drives me, and that's why I can make better choices. If this message sparked something in you, imagine what else we can explore together. Subscribe to the channel and keep walking this path of thought, clarity, and transformation. Have you ever wondered why you keep falling into the same patterns, even when you know they hurt you? Why you attract the same types of people, react the same way to similar situations, or make choices that don't really feel like yours? Carl Jung, a deep thinker and pioneer of modern psychology, gave a powerful and unsettling explanation. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This quote hits a nerve. It challenges one of our most cherished beliefs, that we're in control of our own lives. We like to think we choose, decide, and shape our path with full awareness. But according to Jung, much of what we think of as free will is just the surface. Underneath it lies something far deeper, the unconscious. For Jung, the unconscious isn't just a place where forgotten memories are stored, like Freud suggested. It's a living force within us, a space filled with symbols, fears, desires, wounds, instincts, everything the conscious mind doesn't see or doesn't want to see. And because it's hidden, it quietly runs the show. When we ignore our unconscious, it acts through us, through impulsive reactions, through repeated choices, through self-sabotage, emotional drama, even physical illness. And here's the unsettling part. When we don't recognize these forces, we call them fate. It's just how my life goes. It must be karma. I never get lucky. These things just happen. But Jung challenges us. What if these things aren't just happening to you? What if they're happening from you? That's the turning point in Jung's philosophy. Freedom doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from understanding it. The unconscious isn't out to destroy you. It's trying to complete you. It wants to bring out the parts of yourself that you've rejected, your fears, your unresolved wounds, your raw energy. Take the shadow, for example, Jung's term for all the parts of yourself you've pushed away. Anger, jealousy, desires you were taught to hide. They don't go away just because you ignore them. They show up in other ways, projected onto other people, buried in your judgments, or creeping into your thoughts and dreams. As long as we avoid the shadow, it controls us. We repeat the same mistakes and patterns without even knowing why. We procrastinate, we self-sabotage, we blame others. When in truth, something inside us is just waiting to be seen. So making the unconscious conscious isn't optional, it's essential. It's the difference between living on autopilot and living with awareness. But it's not easy. Looking at your shadow takes courage. Facing your emotional wounds and long-buried truths requires maturity. Most people avoid it at all costs. As Jung put it, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But as long as we keep avoiding it, we're not free. We're just repeating. True freedom isn't about being positive, strong, or perfect. It's about being whole, light and shadow, mind and instinct, order and chaos. That's what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole. It's not about fighting what's hidden, but integrating it. Because we're not just who we present to the world. We're also everything we haven't faced yet. We fool ourselves into thinking we're free when we're really just reacting. But freedom only begins when we create space for the unknown inside us and give a voice to what's been silent. Jung invites us to make a choice. Keep blaming fate, or take ownership of what we feel, repeat, and avoid. To make the unconscious conscious is to grab the wheel. Not to erase the chaos, but to learn how to sail with it instead of against it. Because only those who dive deep into themselves can truly live on the surface, with truth. Is there anything more radical than becoming yourself? In the world we live in, everything seems to push us away from our true nature. standards, expectations, comparisons, ready-made roles. Being somebody often just means fitting into a mold that was already built. But Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe in lives lived to fit molds. For him, true existence is something you build, not something you inherit. That's why he wrote one of his most powerful and mysterious lines, "Become who you are." This isn't a motivational quote, it's a riddle, a challenge. Because how can you become what you already are? The answer lies in realizing that being yourself isn't where you start, it's where you arrive. Nietzsche believed humans aren't born with a fixed essence or ready-made identity. We're born as potential, and that potential only becomes real through creation. To create yourself doesn't just mean developing skills or hitting goals. It means shaping your character, choosing how you want to move through the world, turning your life into a work of art. Nietzsche saw life as an aesthetic project, not aesthetic in the shallow sense of beauty, but in the deeper sense of creation. To him, aesthetics was a kind of freedom, the freedom to bring order to chaos. Life is chaos, unpredictable, unstable, full of contradictions. But within us, there's a creative force that can give meaning to that chaos. Nietzsche called it the will to power, a vital energy that pushes us not just to survive, but to affirm life with intensity, uniqueness, and courage. Become who you are is a call to follow that force and to build a life that's not a copy of someone else's. Nietzsche rejected herd morality, the safety of the rules, the comfort of obeying without thinking. He wanted free spirits, people brave enough to step off the path and ask, what if I wasn't made to please others? What if my real purpose is simply to become myself, fully, deeply? But this journey takes guts. To become who you are, you have to unlearn a lot. Unlearn the need to please. Unlearn the urge to compare. Unlearn the habit of living by other people's scripts. You have to break through the mask and face the scary silence of reinvention. Nietzsche doesn't promise comfort. The path of self-creation is hard, full of confrontation, solitude, and decisions that may distance you from the crowd. But it's also the only path where freedom stops being just an idea and becomes something you actually feel. Becoming who you are starts with questions like, what in me is true? What in me is just imitation? What do I really want? And what did I just learn to want? This journey has no final destination because who you are is always evolving. Nietzsche didn't believe in a true self waiting to be found. He believed in becoming as a never-ending process. That's why he saw life as a work of art. Art doesn't copy, it invents. Art doesn't conform, it risks. Art doesn't seek approval, it follows its own vision. That's how life should be. A creation that doesn't need permission to exist. An expression that comes from the desire to be whole, not the desire to be liked. Nietzsche isn't saying that every life is automatically authentic. He's saying authenticity is something you have to earn. It's not instinct, it's choice, a responsibility to yourself. So, become who you are isn't advice, it's a call to action, not to follow someone else's manual, but to write your own, to take full ownership of your life with clarity and boldness. And maybe that's the most creative act anyone can commit to stop being a reflection and become the source. Because, in the end, the truest kind of freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's being, fully and unapologetically, who only you can be. To live, according to Arthur Schopenhauer, is to desire, and to desire is to suffer. In his philosophy, the world is driven by a blind and relentless force, the will. It moves us, pushes us, stirs us from within, but it never lets us rest, because to desire something means to lack it. And the moment we fulfill one desire, another immediately takes its place. Satisfaction is brief, restlessness is constant. That's why Schopenhauer, as clear as he is melancholic, says, "Art is the only way to escape the will." At first, this might sound strange. Escape the will? What does that even mean? For Schopenhauer, the will is the blind force behind all life. It pulses through animals, humans, and nature itself. It doesn't have a purpose or a plan, it simply wants. And we, as expressions of that will, are stuck in its endless loop, always wanting, always chasing. This, he says, is the root of suffering, the never-ending cycle of desire, frustration, and unrest. The only way to break that cycle, even if just for a moment, is through aesthetic contemplation. It's when, standing before a piece of art, a song, a painting, a landscape, a poem, we stop wanting and simply exist. For a brief moment, the urge to want goes quiet, the mind settles, the ache of lack fades away. We're moved by beauty without needing to possess it. And in that inner stillness, we experience a rare kind of freedom, the freedom to just be without needing anything more. Schopenhauer saw art as a portal to transcendence. While everyday life traps us in usefulness, productivity, and consumption, art lifts us above it all. It returns us to ourselves, not as needy beings, but as pure awareness, able to observe, to feel, to exist, without demand or judgment. This experience isn't just pleasurable, it's liberating. It connects us with a deeper layer of reality, where time slows down, the ego dissolves, and suffering steps aside for presence. But Schopenhauer doesn't just mean consuming art, he also means creating it. To create is an act of resistance against the brutality of existence. It's turning inner chaos into expression. It's shaping pain, and in shaping it, transforming it. The artist, in this sense, isn't just someone sensitive. They're someone who's been through pain and gave it back to the world as beauty, as meaning, as symbol. Art is sublimation, pain turned into form, and that form frees both the one who makes it and the one who receives it. Schopenhauer especially admired music. To him, it was the most powerful of all the arts because it speaks directly to the essence of the will. Music doesn't represent life, it is life. It doesn't describe suffering, it makes it vibrate. And in vibrating with it, it helps us rise above it. This may sound pessimistic, but it's deeply human. Schopenhauer didn't believe we could be saved by reason or by chasing pleasure. He believed in the depth of aesthetic experience as the only moment when we truly get to rest from ourselves. And maybe that's a forgotten truth. It's not enough to just live. We need moments where life pauses, so we can fully feel its mystery. That's what art gives us. A pause in the noise, a breath in the struggle, a flash of clarity in the chaos. It doesn't erase suffering, but it gives us a way to face it without being crushed by it. And when we create, something even deeper happens. We stop being mere victims of the will and become its translators. We play, write, dance, paint, sing, not to escape life, but to give it meaning. So Schopenhauer's phrase isn't a surrender, it's an invitation. When everything feels heavy, create. When the world overwhelms you, pause and look. Look at art, look at beauty. Look at that part of you that isn't ruled by fear, lack, or urgency. And in that rare and quiet moment, you might feel what Schopenhauer called freedom. Not the freedom to want everything, but the peace of not needing anything at all. Who are you, really? Are you a conscious choice or just a reflection? We grow up surrounded by labels, traditions, and expectations. We're born into a name, a culture, a history that came before us. And little by little, we start molding ourselves to fit what others expect. But Jean-Paul Sartre, the French existentialist philosopher, shatters that social mirror with a bold, almost brutal statement. Man invents himself. For Sartre, there's no pre-written essence. There's no fixed human nature telling us who we are or how we should live. We aren't born with a manual. We have to write our own. This is the heart of existentialism. Existence comes before essence. In other words, we're not defined by where we come from, by our traits, or by any pre-made identity. We are defined by the choices we make, by the way we act, and by what we decide to become, day after day, moment by moment. Freedom, in this sense, isn't a gift, it's a weight, because if no one else defines us, then it's entirely on us to invent who we are. There are no excuses, no inherited guilt, no destiny. That idea can feel liberating, but it's also scary, because realizing you're the author of your own life means there's no one else to blame. No one else can live it for you. Everything you do or don't do shapes who you're becoming, and even refusing to choose is a choice. For Sartre, living on autopilot, following the crowd, repeating what you've been taught, that's also inventing yourself, or rather, abandoning yourself. So freedom isn't just a concept, it's a daily practice. It's the ongoing act of building yourself, even through limitations, pain, and failure. Because Sartre doesn't believe in some perfect, limitless freedom. He knows we're born into circumstances. We face struggles, we carry baggage, but still, we're responsible for how we respond to all of it. Someone can be born into hardship, poverty, trauma, oppression, and yet, according to Sartre, there's still a space for choice. How you decide to respond to your story. You can stay a prisoner of your circumstances, or you can become the author of a new path. And this is the hard truth behind Sartre's philosophy. We are nothing until we become something. We're not an essence waiting to be found. We're a work in progress. Every action, every silence, every decision, it's all shaping the person we're becoming. That's why Sartre said, man is condemned to be free, condemned because we can't escape the responsibility. Free, because no matter what, we always have the power to choose, even if it's just how we react. But this freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's a call to authenticity. You're free to be yourself, not to run away from yourself. Free to build a meaningful life, not just copy someone else's script. To invent yourself, Sartre says, takes courage. Courage to stop hiding behind culture, religion, tradition. Courage to face the emptiness, and from it, create meaning that's truly yours. This doesn't mean isolating yourself. It means living with commitment. Because when you invent yourself, you also influence the world. You're not just choosing for yourself. You're setting an example. How you live becomes a message to others. You are, like it or not, a mirror, a choice that echoes. So freedom isn't a consequence-free right. It's a responsibility, maybe the deepest one of all. To be the author of your own life in a world constantly trying to write your story for you. When Sartre says, man invents himself, he's not encouraging some ego-driven performance. He's saying, you're free, but that freedom comes with a cost, and that cost is responsibility. And maybe the greatest work of art you'll ever create isn't something that hangs in a gallery. It's the life you build with awareness, courage, and truth. If this message sparked something in you, imagine what else we can explore together. Subscribe to the channel and keep walking with us through this journey of thought, clarity, and transformation. Creating isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. In a world that feels more standardized, faster, and more predictable every day, the act of creating becomes a form of resistance, not just in art, but in how we live. That's exactly what Gilles Deleuze meant when he said, "To create is to resist." At first, this might sound cryptic, but it expresses a core idea of his philosophy. Living creatively is one of the most radical ways to push back against what's been imposed on us. Because creating isn't about copying. It's not about following a formula. Creating means breaking away from what's already been done. It's making space for something new where only repetition existed. Deleuze believed that modern life is packed with rigid roles, fixed identities, and safe, pre-packaged answers. Everything is labeled in advance: what success looks like, what's right, what's normal. But these labels are suffocating. They lead to a kind of life that isn't really lived, just executed. Creation interrupts that autopilot mode. To create is to resist the obvious, to resist being passive, to resist a society that wants everything to be predictable, measurable, and useful. That's why creation is a form of freedom, but not the romanticized version of doing whatever you want. The freedom Deleuze talks about is deeper. It's the ability to bring into the world something that didn't exist before, to invent new ways of thinking, feeling, seeing, and living. And this isn't just about making art. It's about living creatively in any way. Creating might mean writing a song, yes, but it can also mean thinking for yourself, loving without following a script, or walking a path no one's named yet. In that sense, creation and resistance go hand in hand, because everything around us pushes us to conform. From school to social media, we're encouraged to repeat, to follow, to fit in. Being creative means going against that current, and this resistance doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, daily, subtle. It happens when you refuse to accept a role that doesn't fit you, when you don't shrink your thoughts to match what's popular, when you choose your own pace in a world that rushes you. To create is to resist, because the world doesn't want you to bloom. It just wants you to function. Deleuze saw creativity as the act of making real difference, not surface-level difference, but the kind that disrupts systems, breaks habits, and opens space for new ways of being. This requires an active stance, not a reactive one. A creator, to Deleuze, isn't someone who reacts to the world, but someone who proposes another one, who sees possibilities others overlook, who finds openings where most only see walls. And here's the ethical and political power of creation. To create is to say no and yes at the same time. No to what limits you, silences you, reduces you. Yes to what you could still become. Yes to what might exist through you. That's the deeper meaning of resisting by creating. Not just rejecting the current world, but making room for something new. Deleuze knew that power doesn't only survive through direct repression. It lives through repetition, through habit, through the normalization of the absurd. Which is why, for him, creation is always subversive. Even when it's quiet, it shifts things. Even when it's gentle, it shakes foundations. Even when it doesn't destroy, it transforms, silently but completely. To create is to affirm life. Life as force, life as movement, life as something too wild and fluid to be boxed into formulas. And maybe that's why creating can feel scary, because real creators don't just live, they ignite. They clear paths. They stretch what's possible. They challenge the limits of what we call realistic. So Deleuze's phrase isn't a slogan, it's a call to action. Resist by creating, even in small ways, even in silence, even if no one gets it at first. Because every creative act, no matter how small, is a crack in the wall of repetition. And through those cracks, the new comes in. And through those cracks, freedom starts to breathe. What if life doesn't come with a built-in meaning? What if everything we've been taught about purpose, destiny, or divine plans is really just our attempt to fill a silent, terrifying void? Albert Camus, the French-Algerian philosopher, didn't run from that void. He didn't cover it with comforting beliefs, and he didn't hide behind cynicism either. Instead, he stared into the silence of the universe, and from that silence, he brought back an answer. Rebellion is the act by which a person affirms themselves in the face of the absurd. For Camus, the absurd is born at the point where two things collide: our deep desire for meaning and the indifferent silence of the world. We want life to make sense. We want logic, fairness, purpose, but reality doesn't always respond. Good people suffer. Randomness rules. Death comes without warning. The world doesn't explain itself. And that's where the absurd begins. But recognizing the absurd isn't the end, it's the beginning. Camus refuses to run away, whether through blind faith or total despair. Instead, he offers a third path, revolt. Not a bitter, angry kind of rebellion, but a creative, life-affirming one. A refusal to give in to the void. The world has no meaning? Then I'll create one. And in that act of rebellion, something beautiful happens. Freedom is born. Because if there's no pre-made meaning we're forced to follow, we're free to make our own. Unlike other existentialists who see the absurd as a curse, Camus sees it as a call to action. The person who rebels doesn't give up. They don't settle. They rise, they act, they choose to live, even when life seems empty. And that's the heart of this idea. To rebel is to say yes to life, without needing guarantees. To love the world, even when it promises you nothing. To keep walking, even without a map. And in doing so, to carve out a path that's uniquely yours. But this kind of freedom requires clarity. Camus doesn't sugarcoat it. He doesn't ask us to fake optimism. He calls us to brave realism. True rebellion only starts once we fully understand the absurd and choose not to run from it. So creating meaning doesn't mean making up fairy tales. It means building something that matters, even if it won't last forever. It means loving without needing promises, acting without needing rewards, choosing goodness even in a world that owes you nothing. This is perhaps the most honest kind of freedom, living by choice, not by default, choosing to be whole, choosing to create, choosing to be human, despite everything. Camus saw art, compassion, and personal ethics as powerful forms of rebellion. When someone paints, writes, helps, resists, they are affirming life. They're saying, the world might be indifferent, but I'm not. That attitude challenges every system that tries to hand us ready-made meanings. Religions that demand obedience in exchange for purpose. Politics that disguise control as truth. Social norms that tell you how to live without ever asking who you are. Rebellion says, I don't need the world to give me meaning. I can create my own. In that moment, a person becomes a creator. Not of fake stories, but of a real, grounded, deeply human existence. A life that's worth living, not because it follows a plan, but because it answers the silence of the universe with dignity. For Camus, rebellion is the birth of a new kind of humanity, one without blind faith, but also without giving up. A humanity that, even without certainty, chooses to live fully, honestly, and responsibly. To be free, in this view, isn't to escape the world. It's to face it, to carry the weight of existence, and still choose joy, love, care, and creation. As Camus wrote in The Myth of Sisyphus, we must imagine Sisyphus happy, even condemned to push a boulder up a hill forever. Sisyphus finds freedom in the act itself, in refusing to give up, in affirming himself against the absurd, and so do we. Pushing our own boulders, living with the absurd, but still choosing every day to say, life matters because I choose to make it matter. True creation doesn't come from rational effort. It comes from listening deeply to something stirring inside. To create isn't just to think, it's to let something within you take shape. Carl Jung, a deep explorer of the human soul, captured this beautifully when he said, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." This quote completely shifts how we usually think about creativity. It's not about logic or strategy. For Jung, creation is a spontaneous, organic process. It doesn't respond to the outside world. It's a call that rises from the inside. He saw this as part of what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming your whole self, integrating reason and emotion, light and shadow, ego and unconscious. In that sense, creativity isn't just for artists, It's a natural movement of the human soul toward wholeness. Every time you create something that comes from deep within, an idea, a gesture, a project, you're giving voice to yourself, the most authentic, centered part of who you are. But Jung also warned, the intellect alone can't take you there. Yes, it helps organize and communicate, but logic doesn't spark the creative flame. That spark comes from play, from imagination allowed to wander, from curiosity that isn't chasing profit, from expression that doesn't need to explain itself, from simply being alive and letting that be enough. To Jung, the play instinct is sacred. It's how the unconscious speaks. It's through experimentation, exploration, and improvisation that new ideas emerge, new images surprise us, and hidden parts of ourselves come to life. That's why creativity can heal, because it gives voice to the parts of us we've silenced or forgotten. What was once buried, pain, conflict, longing, can finally take shape. A shape that speaks through images, colors, words, and sound. So to create isn't just to make something for the world, it's to make space for your inner world to breathe, and that's where freedom begins. In a society obsessed with productivity, efficiency, and control, creating freely, without needing a practical outcome, is a radical act. It's choosing to live from the inside out. It's honoring the rhythm of your soul, the cycles of your psyche, the whispers of your unconscious. It's also reclaiming the childlike part of you. Not childishness, but the openness and playfulness of childhood. Children don't create to impress. They create because something inside needs to move. Jung believed true creation is driven by an inner necessity. Something in you needs to come out, not because the world demands it, but because your soul is saying, this has to exist. And when that expression is honored, the outcome doesn't really matter. The value isn't in the final product, it's in the process, in the experience, in the connection to yourself, in the moments where you feel fully alive and fully whole. That's the symbolic power of creativity. It brings together what was once divided. It bridges the conscious and the unconscious. It gives form to the formless. It reunites logic with feeling, the body with the soul, speech with silence. For Jung, creativity is one of the purest forms of freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from choosing between options on the outside, but the kind that comes from listening to what's true on the inside. The freedom to be yourself, even when that challenges what others expect of you. So if you feel the urge to create, write, paint, sing, build, dream, not to impress, but to integrate, to listen, to free yourself. Because as Jung reminds us, healing doesn't come from what we control. It comes from what we express with honesty. And every authentic creation is a bridge between who you are and who you're still becoming. I hope this reflection sparked something in you. Maybe a new idea, a lingering question, or even a desire to see life from a different angle. Because that's what philosophy really does. It doesn't hand you ready-made answers. It invites you to think more deeply. Now tell me, what's still echoing in your mind after watching this? Was there a part that really got to you? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to keep this conversation going with you. If this content resonated with you, give the video a like, share it with someone who's also looking to think differently, and of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. There's so much more to explore, more ideas, more thinkers, and more thought-provoking insights waiting for you here. See you in the next video.